Where do you see firms like yours hitting like a growth ceiling? Is it through technology or are there other aspects?
Yeah, I think technology, I mean, you're going to continue to grow. I mean, we're going to get more properties, right? So keep having the properties come in. I think AI is a huge thing. And I think that, when I started, everybody was kind of like on an equal playing field in the words of like the digital world.
It kind of brings us all back into this weird level playing field, but not all at the same time. Yeah, it's a wild west a little bit. What would you say is a headache that you've maybe been able to turn into a profit or a revenue for you?
So a lot of companies came out faster and are like digitally a little more savvy than others. But I think the AI world, and it's so new to everybody, is we're kind of almost back to a starting point of like everybody's on a playing field again, because do we know how like in Claude, Gemini, Perplexity, etc., how our properties are going to show up?
Hi, Kim. Thank you for joining me today. Kim, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Oh, hi, I'm Kim Boland. I'm the SVP of Marketing at AION Management. I've been in this industry about, let's say, 18 plus years, so a long time. The evolution of the internet's been a really wild ride.
Awesome. And I understand that AION has over 19,000 doors across multifamily properties in Philadelphia.
Not in Philadelphia, so we mostly in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, some in Virginia, Ohio. We've got 2 properties in Indiana, so it's about 7 different states.
Wow, amazing. So totally spread. You have a lot of work to do.
A lot of areas.
Lots of travel, it sounds like. I would love for you to kind of walk me through your journey. How did you get into this industry? I find a lot of people kind of fall into it, and it's a very deep rabbit hole. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with our listeners how you what drew you into this business, if you will.
Yeah, so real long time ago, I feel like. So I lived in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Northeast PA. People that know, it's near Scranton, which is near where the office, the
Oh,
show
I
The
would
Office
say,
is like. So that's
yeah.
how people tend to know that area, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre. So I grew up there and I worked in what they called an auto mall. So it was a mall, inside mall with 11 different brands of cars. So you'd walk down and you had the Mercedes, the Hondas, the Volvos, the Buicks, etc. So it was like everything was inside. So I worked there for a while, and then I moved up to the King of Prussia area, and then sort of stayed in the car world, but I worked for a company that sold funeral cars. So I
Oh,
went from selling, crazy. I went from like company that's selling like Lexuses and Hondas to like bright red fire truck hearses and minivan hearses and funeral limousines, a crazy world that, no one ever thinks of, but the
there's an
story.
industry.
Yeah, I mean, the salespeople were funeral directors. So, and the stories they would tell, like, it was kind of fun sitting there. That place kind of closed down. So I just started to apply for jobs. And at the time, and I guess it's still a little similar, things have changed. And the car business has sort of come a long way since 19 years ago. But selling cars online was very
Hmm.
similar to renting apartments online. So it was the same process. Back then you couldn't like design your Tesla at that time, right? So, everything would just be online. You would apply, you'd call, etc. So I applied at a management company in King of Prussia, and I got the job just because it was kind of a similar background experience of the
Mm.
cars versus apartments. So that auto mall got me, fell into the apartment community, knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about multifamily or apartments. I grew up in a single family home. So that's sort of kind of how I fell into it. My first position was just like a digital marketing specialist. So at the time, the company I worked for they were a small company, and they had taken over like overnight properties,
Wow.
which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
And they went from a small management company to about 20,000 units. So that was like the very beginning, I guess, of like apartments.com and rent.com and apartment guide, is when there were so many different internet listing sites. So I would sit there and I would audit them. So a
Oh,
year
okay.
in, I would look at these sites and it would still have the previous management company's information, and all the phone numbers would be. So I really started to learn all the platforms, you know, all the ILS platforms, which really at the beginning stages, they would give me a login to 120 different logins. I was like, wait a minute, there has
Well,
to be one login that makes sense to everything. So really the evolution, and you think back, you think that's crazy, right? But Yeah, but the evolution of like those were just sort of kind of new, right? Those
Yeah,
internet sites, we were
absolutely.
still in books. You'd still go to Wawa, you still go to the convenience store and have like books. So it was kind of, I was at the very beginning of the evolution of that. And then Facebook came, right? And it was like, oh, Facebook, now that it was open not just to colleges, it's
Hmm.
like, oh, well, every property needs a Facebook page. So rolling out Facebook pages. God, I seem very old,
Oh,
right? For
interesting.
anybody listening now is young,
No.
I'd be like, wow, she's been around for a while. But yeah, that evolution of like Facebook and rolling
Yeah,
that out to 120 properties. So, things kind of just, I really was at the very cusp of like all the products starting. So really
excellent.
understanding how everything spoke to each other,
Hmm.
all the APIs that was brand new, mid speeds, all that was like, you know, kind of coming out and people trying to understand that. So
Hmm.
I was kind of in the early stages of the digital world of multifamily.
Absolutely. Even having the foresight to market it on Facebook, right? Like now communities have their own public web page that in some states is required, right? And to think that was never a thing 20 years ago and you were doing it without anyone telling you. So I think
Yeah.
you have a lot of foresight there, which is great because now you're like, oh, yeah, when I was, first starting, of course, like that's walk in the park where
Yeah.
some communities are like, what? What is this? So
Yeah.
good for you. That's awesome. That's awesome. I'd like to understand, because you've had obviously such different careers and seen so many different parts of the industry and seen how it's grown in the past, I'm going to say 5 years. No, you know what? Let's do 10 years. Where or how has the industry changed? Like obviously it sounds like technology is a huge bit in communication and marketing, but from where you sit, how has it changed?
I think the internet has changed, right? So,
Yes.
like I sort of stated at one time, we had a lot of different vendors, and over time, a lot of those vendors have been condensed. So, I think at one point I'll just stick with the ILSs, we had like 8 ILS sites, and
Mm,
now we're down to really like 2 or 3,
wow.
which is really crazy, right? So, and the prospect really has less places to go check, right? So, fees go up because, there's less, but technology has increased. I think that a lot of it is the prospect experience has gotten better,
Mm,
right? And that comes with a lot of our work internally from management companies. But, the whole thing is we're here for the prospect, especially marketing, right? If we can't get that prospect in the door, then we're not doing our job. But
mhm.
like making those sites easier. So, you don't even think about it now because you've been booking appointments, for yourself, for your hair appointment or your nails, etc. But like appointments for prospects to come visit apartments is super, I don't say super new, but probably only the past 2 or 3 years has everybody gotten on board. So,
Mhm.
we sort of take it for granted, but like creating that, be like, oh, I'm on, whatever.com and I can just book my appointment for the date and time I want, right? So that, or applying online. Like, why do I have to leave my current site to go to somebody else's website to actually start the application? So
Mm.
making the experience a little more easy. Also a huge focus on, you know, bringing, like I always say, oh, everybody should be able to do everything from the couch that they're sitting on right at home. Like, I don't want to get up and go anywhere, right? And book those appointments, but I'd rather sit here. So really, past few years is 360 tours, going in an apartment. Like my goal in life is a management company where I can do a 360 of every community. So like
Ugh,
on my maps, right? That's ideal.
yeah.
Not as easy, I could talk about it, but photos of everything, just sort of bringing the life to the prospect.
Mhm.
That has changed a lot. Interactive maps, huge thing, right? I can actually look at the property and be like, well, the swimming pool's there. I want to live there. You know what? I don't want to be near anybody. And maybe I'll just pick apartment at the back, right? So those type of things in the past 10 years have definitely been enhanced, especially for the prospect experience, which is huge because if
Mm.
we can make it easy for them, then they'll come in our door.
Do you think you're gonna dive into, like, a virtual reality experience in any like, the 360 is already there, but, like, with the headsets or
I mean, people have tried. I mean, people have definitely tried, but I think that, you also need to work for a company who is like really forward thinking and kind of like has fun money to spend. A lot of
no
budgets are
one has
really
fun money.
tight, right? So there have been people have been creating those. I have been to conferences where that is like, something that somebody has created. I don't know if we're there yet, but 100%, we might be. There are ones I've seen that you have to be on property and you can take a virtual tour of like what the unit would look like if it
Mhm.
was actually furnished.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
AI does that really well too
the
in the
sky's the
real estate
limit,
process.
nothing shocks me
It's
anymore. We
true.
know how fast technologies change. So, it could happen in the next 10 years.
Absolutely. Where do you see firms like yours hitting like a growth ceiling? Is it through technology or are there other aspects?
Yeah, I think technology, I mean, you're going to continue to grow. I mean, we're going to get more properties, right? So keep having the properties come in. I think AI is a huge thing. And I think that, when I started, everybody was kind of like on an equal playing field in the words of like the digital world. So, everybody was on par. And, so then people started to update their websites. They started to, like I said, social media started to get there. But then they got to be a point where like some firms were able to, could be with their staff, could be, just what their company's focus was, took to the next level, right?
Hmm.
So a lot of companies came out faster and are like digitally a little more savvy than others. But I think the AI world, and it's so new to everybody, is we're kind of almost back to a starting point of like everybody's on a playing field again, because do we know how like in Claude, Gemini, Perplexity, etc., how our properties are going to show up
Hmm.
and what can we do to make them show up? So I feel like that's like a whole new, it's like starting again with like Facebook, but like what can we do in our own, in our own companies to try to set ourselves up for success. So
Hmm.
when more people start using AI tools to search for apartments, we show up over others.
Right.
So I feel
Yeah.
like that's what's going on now. And that's like the new thing of like trying to figure out what will make me show up. Do I
Right.
focus on reviews? Am I putting FAQs? Like, what am I doing on my website, SEO? So it's like a fun new world now,
Hmm.
trying to figure that out. So I think
Yeah.
that's the next stage of like, of coming up
Evolution.
higher,
Yeah.
yeah, evolution and coming up higher than others.
Because it definitely sounds like the prospect expectations have totally shifted. Would you say that? Like now you can't just have reviews. Now you do have to have 3D representations. Like now you can't just cut it, right? Like it has to be total, almost like all five senses have to be to
I
get them,
think that
you know?
it brings your ads to the next level, but in the end, do you know what's going to have somebody move in? The price, right?
True.
Because if you're right, we can also do all this stuff, but if
Yes.
my budget is $1,200,
It's
right?
not
And
changing.
that's all I have,
Yeah.
you have a 360 or not. If that's all I have, that's all I'm getting, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think that enhances also a lot of stuff you have on your websites help you show up better, like it searches.
Yes.
So, but the end result is all what comes in my pocket, right?
Yeah. And SEO has changed too throughout the course of the last few years. Now not only do you have to think about SEO just like on a Google search or a Yahoo or a Bing, but now you're doing SEO with Chrome, like with
Yeah.
Claude or with, ChatGPT, and that's how people are searching and bringing you up, right? And it's just you're right. It kind of brings us all back into this weird level playing field, but not all at the same time. Yeah, it's a wild west a little bit. What would you say is a headache that you've maybe been able to turn into a profit or a revenue for you?
A headache?
It sounds like people physically being in your space. It might sound like a headache, but I'm not sure.
I mean, listen, marketing spends money, so we revenue, right? Like we're the one that spends. I don't think we're a revenue generator. I mean, in the end, we're the revenue generator because we help get people in the door, but we're
Yeah.
really the ones who spend money.
Yeah.
It's always like, hey, what can we cut from marketing? They're spending too much, but in reality, we really don't. I think a lot of time is buy-in, and I think a lot of times in the marketing world, you see a tool and you're like, oh, well, this could be really great, and I can see how this, but trying to get somebody whose brain doesn't think like that
Mm.
to buy in sometimes is probably the biggest headache
Hmm.
because you do have a tool, but then so it's trying to explain what it is. And then on top of that, asking for more money. So I think that's probably honestly one of the biggest headaches I think most marketing teams run into is trying to, get the buy-in that you need to roll out something that you think would be beneficial.
Absolutely. Would you say like your productivity on the team has increased or like how are you maximizing it knowing that there's all of these technologies available to you but then you still have to do the buy-in? Like Are you putting that as a part of the ROI, or how are you playing out that story?
I mean, I think that we always have to prove what we're doing, so I just hired a new marketing manager. So that helps too, because you have people that focus on the properties. So yeah, when you're trying to get when you try to get a product, you need to sort of explain how it's going to help.
Hmm.
What it's going to benefit. Are you going to, might not be saving money, but you could be saving time. And if I can save mine and my team's time, 45 to 3 hours a day, right? Then that helps with productivity and we can get other things done. So, I think that's really like a focus on what you're selling. There's not always a monetary cost, but sometimes it's literally making an experience a heck of a lot better than what we currently have.
Right. It's almost like a lifestyle, right? Like this
Yeah.
is something you have to live, eat, and breathe for sure.
Yeah.
How would you say that your company culture firm, because the management firm that you're with right now, you've been about 11 years, right? Correct me if I'm
Now
wrong.
this one, no, this one I've been at a year.
A year, okay. The firm in total, how would you
Oh,
say
about 8 years.
yeah. So how would you say like the company culture has changed? And even actually from the other firms that you've worked with all of these expectations as well, because now everyone has to be on, everyone is so readily accessible, everyone needs to work faster, everyone's working too slow. How would you say that's maybe changed?
I think I've experience now from when I started the previous company is that when you are smaller and even at 19, 20,000 units, like that's still pretty small. It's not tiny, but it's small and you're actually able to do things. So like if something's not working, you can shift very easily. My previous management company, we went from 20,000 units to extremely over about 100,000 units.
Mm.
So that you go from being a company that's very nimble to like turning the Titanic, which is pretty hard, right? So it's harder to get things approved. It's harder to do things, right? So I think that over time, right now I'm back in a company that's pretty nimble and are willing to try things. So I think that's fun. That's fun coming back to like actually getting to do stuff because that makes your job fun.
Yeah.
So, those are really the difference of like like being at a company who's like was small and have grown really big and then like a newer company. I think newer companies tend to be almost like a startup, right? There's money there, they're nimble, you can do fun things. Once you get really large, tends to be a little harder.
Because you've seen these like these management firms for these communities kind of grow overnight, like you were saying in some of your experiences, would you say that the management style has also shifted? I'm hearing, that managers are overworked. Well, not even hearing that. I'm ex-manager myself. But, how do you feel that management firms well, are they changing, or do you think there needs to be change in the way that they are, providing service and working with their staff to just keep on going? Because like as you said, if overnight, if you're acquiring 100 communities, how are you even, controlling quality, right? Like, because you have
Yeah.
all these different people onboarding, and how do we help making sure that the resident has that really good experience across the board? It doesn't matter who's on site. Do you have any suggestions or solutions that you've found successful?
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of it comes from the top. And if the top's proud of something and they're pushing stuff down, and I think just has to be a cohesive message, right? Because you go from a small group, right, where you could have 5, 10 regional managers, for example, right? And then so your message tends to get across to 5 people. But then as you start going to 20, right, then the message is like the game of telephone. Well, I thought they said this, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell you this. And that's kind of where, and then you have turnover, right? So, is that message getting to the new person or that like it's kind of you just throw that new person to the wolves and is lost in translation because everybody else is busy now. So, I think it's very hard. I think that has to come from the top and continuously be like reiterated over and over. And I think that it's a hard thing across the board, no matter really what size. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
that game of telephone is like, I mean, we all played it as a child, right? So you can tell me one message and I'm going to take it as this. And then I tell you the same message and you take it a different point of view. And
Mm-hmm.
that you have personality. So, I just feel like, I mean, have I ever been somewhere super duper, super successful? Probably not. You're still dealing with people and personalities. But I think that leadership, it's the role of leadership to continuously push that message down to the different levels to, make somebody comfortable in their position.
I think it definitely makes it easier when you're doing the same thing the same way. It doesn't matter which property, and that way you could change up where you're going or what you're doing, but you don't have to like have a big, a big worry about it. You're like, no problem. I already know the process is already in play, right? So
Yeah.
absolutely. For leaders such as yourself that are, growing their portfolios, and obviously you're seeing all the technologies that are out there, what's the one thing or what's the first thing you would tell them to either fix or a piece of advice that you might have for them?
I think that you need to make sure that I'd say that your APIs are set up correctly. And I know that's right. There's a lot of products you get into and you're like, but it's just not set up correctly. Like people like, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And then you look, you're like, but this isn't connected. Right. So, and it doesn't, it's like looking at your TV and you're like, why isn't it working? Like the plug is not in. Right. So I think that's like step one. I think that, listen, we all use products that are like, oh, I hate this product. It's so slow, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of times it's just the setup of it. So just asking questions. I'm a huge person. I love asking questions. I don't know. A lot of times the people on the other end, they're like, oh, Kim's asking another question. But like the more questions you ask, you understand. And I also think that you need to question things, right? Besides asking a question, you need to question things like, why is it doing this way? And speaking up if something's not working. And I think that's a huge thing. And I actually did a session at a conference of like talking to, like, say, a vendor and explaining, like, being truthful of like why it's not working. Because everybody's going to think things are hunky dory. If you're not honest, totally honest about like your experience, nobody can help you. And there's plenty of people that can help fix things, but it's just asking why it's not working. What can I do to do better? What can I do to make it better? Those type of questions of like, and I think that tends to fix a lot of the issues that are going on, is being honest with your suppliers, and that a lot of things can be fixed right from there.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. Honesty is always the best policy. And I sometimes it feels a little uncomfortable, to be honest, but it's true.
Yeah.
You do get really good answers, and sometimes the answers you don't want to hear, but they're the right answers, right? Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I love that. This is great. All right. A little bit of rapid fire before we close things off. So I want you to pick one. You don't have to give me a reason why, but just to see what's your preference. So, trade shows or lunch and learns? You like both?
No. Trade shows I'm not a huge fan of lunch and learns.
Okay.
Not my favorite. So I guess I'll pick trade shows, as I gave you my opinion. But
I'll take trade shows for now. You can always change your mind later. Instagram or Facebook?
Facebook.
Facebook, okay.
Yeah.
Flood, fire, or flood? And this is more of like a property management thing.
Oh, blood.
Okay, all right. People, parking, or pets? Pets. Excellent. Excellent. I agree. I like pets because at least I can, they're cute, right? Exactly. Awesome. All right, we're going to close it up. So one final question for you. What is one thing that you wish you did earlier in your career? If, you might not even want to change anything, but what is maybe that one thing that maybe you would have started earlier if you could?
I think getting more involved. I'm very involved now. I feel like that's a huge thing, that if you're starting out, get involved in your associations, if your company allows you, go to conferences, talk to everybody. Also, go on LinkedIn, see who you know, and like have them connect you, because in this industry, being connected and knowing people can really change the trajectory of your job, but also the information that you can get from there is huge. So, I would say, get out there, find a mentor, really get involved in the industry, I think is the number one thing I could tell somebody getting into this industry to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't realize the power of this industry. It's a 24-hour job in some cases, but it's recession proof, pandemic proof. They don't teach it in school the way that they do some of these other professions, right? So I think maybe we need to put a new marketing spin on property management and community management, because there's lots of business to be had for sure. Absolutely.
And it's a lot of fun.
All right. Thank you so much, Kim, for joining me today. I hope you had fun, and I wish you continued success.
Thank you. You as well.